My husband said I was just a housewife who didn't understand business. So I built a shadow investment firm, took control of his company, and now he pays me alimony from a paycheck I quietly signed off on. You're just a housewife, Claire. You don't understand how the real world works. Those words didn't just sting. They sank deep, buried themselves under my skin like splinters I couldn't pull out. And they came from the man I married, the man I gave everything to. I still remember that morning. He was buttoning up his shirt tailored crisp expensive, while I stood in the kitchen in my robe, hair still damp from the shower wiping oatmeal off our toddler's face. I'd asked him gently if we could revisit the household budget. Groceries were up, the kids were growing fast. I'd found a few ways we could cut back. He didn't even look at me, just threw those words over his shoulder like they meant nothing. Just a housewife. It wasn't the first time he said something like that. But that time something cracked. Something deep and quiet and final. He left for work with a kiss on my cheek like everything was normal. But I just stood there, frozen. My hands still clutching the damp washcloth, my mind spiraling. I'd given up everything for him. My job, my career, my name even. When we got married, he asked me to help hold things together at home while he scaled his startup. I believed in him. I believed in us. Back then we were a team. He worked late nights. I packed his lunches and learned how to code just enough to offer feedback on his website. I organized his early investor meetings, booked flights, took calls while breastfeeding. I didn't complain, not once, because I thought we were building something together. But somewhere along the way, he started building. And I just disappeared. He started introducing me as Claire, my wife, and never mentioned that I once worked in finance. Never mentioned that I used to manage portfolios larger than the one he was struggling to grow. Slowly, I stopped speaking in meetings, stopped attending investor dinners. He said it was better if I didn't confuse the brand, and like a fool, I agreed. Because I loved him, because I thought love meant sacrifice, because I thought someday when we were stable, he'd see me again, he'd remember who I was. But that morning after that sentence, I realized something. He didn't forget. He never cared. That evening, I didn't cry. I fed the kids, put them to bed, and opened my old laptop, the one I hadn't touched in nearly 5 years. It was dusty, slow, and the keyboard stuck a little. But it booted up. And just like that, so did I. I spent the next few hours reading, catching up. The finance world had changed, but not so much that I couldn't keep up. I opened spreadsheets, made notes, traced connections. Then I remembered an old friend, Vanessa, who'd left corporate to build her own investment firm. I messaged her, and by midnight she replied, "Claire? Oh my God, where have you been? We need to talk." I felt something I hadn't felt in years, seen. The next morning I made pancakes for the kids like usual. He walked in late, muttering about traffic. I handed him his coffee. He didn't notice I was wearing makeup for the first time in months. Didn't notice I'd blow-dried my hair. Didn't even notice I was wearing the red dress he once said made me look like I actually had a career. But that was fine, because I wasn't doing it for him. That day after I dropped the kids at school, I met Vanessa at a corner cafe downtown. She looked me up and down and smiled. "You're ready," she said. I didn't know what she meant at the time, but by the end of that coffee meeting, I knew exactly where I was headed. Not revenge, not yet, but awakening. And God help him, he had no idea what I was about to do. Vanessa didn't waste time with small talk. By the second cappuccino, she was laying out ideas, showing me her current portfolio, and casually dropping names of investors I hadn't heard since my corporate days. "This space is starving for people who actually know how to manage risk," she said. "Not just pitch unicorn dreams." Then she looked up. "I remember how sharp you were, Claire. You just disappeared." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "I didn't disappear," I said quietly. "I got erased." Vanessa didn't blink. She reached into her bag and handed me a folder. "This is a startup incubator I'm involved in. They're funding minority women-owned firms quietly for now. If you're serious, I can get your name in." That folder felt like a passport. I spent the next 3 months rebuilding myself from scratch. During the day, I was still the housewife, laundry, grocery runs, carpool. But after dark, I was up until 2 a.m., studying market trends, researching tax loopholes, analyzing deal memos Vanessa sent me on the sly. I couldn't tell anyone, not even my sister. I started calling it the second life, and in that life, I was powerful. I registered a shell company under a neutral name, V&C Holdings. Vanessa backed me as a silent partner. We operated lean, no office, no staff, just smart capital and smarter decisions. The first investment was small, a green tech startup, run by a woman who reminded me of myself 10 years ago. I met her at a private networking event, tucked into the back of a co-working space, barely enough cash flow to pay her developers. She didn't recognize me. No one there did. I wore a blazer, red lips, confidence, and I wrote the check. 2 weeks later, I sat across from my husband at dinner. He was distracted scrolling through emails. Some investment firm just bought out half of EcoNest, he muttered. Their valuation jumped overnight. I sipped my wine and nodded. That's interesting. He never even looked up. By the end of that quarter, V&C Holdings had stakes in 3 promising companies, 2 in biotech, 1 in logistics AI. All run by women, all undervalued, all growing. But the real breakthrough, it came when Vanessa forwarded me a deck. Recognized the name she wrote, I stared at the email and nearly dropped my phone. The company pitching was his, my husband's company, the one I'd helped him start in our garage while 6 months pregnant, the one I'd named. Now 5 years later, they were pitching for Series C funding. Their burn rate was high, their margins were thin, and they were desperate. Vanessa added one more sentence. They're open to silent investors. One in, I didn't respond right away. That night I lay awake staring at the ceiling. I could feel him breathing next to me, peaceful, clueless. He still thought I was just a housewife, still thought I spent my days watching daytime TV and shopping online. I turned to look at him, and in that moment something in me hardened. I whispered more to myself than to him. Fine, let's play that game. 2 weeks later, I wired the money through V&C Holdings, just enough to get in the door. I reviewed the contracts line by line, made sure I had access to quarterly financials, made sure my voting rights were buried just deep enough that he wouldn't see them until it was too late. Vanessa was stunned. You're investing in his company, she asked. I smiled. No, I said. I'm buying a front row seat. At first I thought I'd just observe, stay in the shadows, quiet, strategic. Let him dig his own grave and I'd be there to watch. But the deeper I looked into his company's books, the more concerned I became. He was bleeding money, hiring too fast, spending too recklessly, flashy office overpriced consultants, 6-figure marketing rebrands that led nowhere. He'd built an empire on buzzwords, and now the buzz was fading. I watched from a distance as he gave interviews posted on LinkedIn about leadership under pressure. He looked so proud, so polished. But behind the scenes, I saw the truth in spreadsheets. That quarter revenue dropped. 3 clients churned. One of their key engineers quit and joined a rival firm I had already invested in. The irony nearly made me laugh. Still, I said nothing. At home, he was moody, snapped at the kids, came home later than usual, blamed the market, the staff, the lazy new generation. He never once looked in the mirror. One night, I made lasagna his favorite. He barely touched it. Instead, he poured himself a drink, loosened his tie and muttered, "Maybe you were right. Maybe I should have let you handle the finances." I blinked. It was the first time in years he acknowledged I knew what I was doing. But I didn't take the bait. I smiled gently the way a good wife should, then cleared the dishes like always. Inside, though, I was screaming. Because I had the power to fix everything and I wasn't going to lift a single finger. Let him sweat. Meanwhile, Vanessa and I tightened our grip. We bought out a small but vocal investor in his company. Just 6%, but enough to get on the internal email list. That's when we saw the memo emergency board meeting, proposal to restructure executive team. Apparently, the investors were getting nervous. They wanted someone with more experience to step in as COO, someone with a finance background, someone with a track record of turning around messy growth. Vanessa laughed when she saw the name they were considering. "It's you," she said. I shook my head. "No, too soon. Claire, you could walk in there tomorrow and clean house. You'd have every right. But I wasn't ready for them to see me yet. Instead, we made a different move. Quietly, methodically. We pushed our shareholding past 15%. Enough to be heard. Enough to influence votes. Enough to block decisions. Suddenly, he was boxed in and didn't even know it. At home, he paced the living room like a man losing control. Our son's science project sat forgotten on the coffee table while he took call after call. "I don't get it," he said one night. "Every time we're about to close a deal, someone pulls out. It's like Someone's working against me. I sat beside him, rubbed his shoulder, played the part. Oh, honey, I said sweetly. I'm sure it's just bad timing. But inside, I was miles away reading a text from Vanessa. We just pulled another sponsor. He's going to implode soon. And then, as if the universe had a sense of humor, I got a call from my lawyer. My prenup, the one he insisted on years ago, had a clause. A very small clause, tucked in between asset disclosures and stock options. If spousal contribution exceeds 50% of unpaid domestic and child-rearing duties, over a 10-year period, claimant may be entitled to retroactive financial compensation in the event of divorce. In other words, if I could prove I ran the household while he built his company, I could take him for alimony, real alimony, from a company I now partially owned. That night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing my teeth, staring at my reflection. I didn't see a housewife anymore. I saw a strategist. And she was just getting started. The boardroom was colder than I remembered. Sterile glass walls, leather chairs no one ever sat in comfortably. A conference table polished to a shine, probably the most expensive thing in the whole company, aside from my husband's ego. He didn't recognize me at first. I entered last, dressed in sharp navy hair, pinned tight. No makeup beyond a bold red lip. The kind of look that says, "Don't underestimate me." He stood at the head of the table, rambling through a desperate pitch about scaling sustainably and future-proofing operations. His voice cracked more than once. The moment I sat down, he glanced up, brows furrowed, confused. But he still didn't see me. I didn't speak until the vote. The investors were divided. A few had grown tired of his leadership. A few still believed in him, or at least in the image he projected. And then there was me. Vanessa cleared her throat. There's one more shareholder who hasn't voted. All eyes turned. I didn't flinch. I reached into my folder, pulled out the signed proxy forms, and placed them on the table. Then I said it. My name is Claire Reynolds, majority shareholder in VNC Holdings. We now own 27% of this company. The room froze. My husband stared at me like he'd just seen a ghost. Claire, he croaked. I didn't smile, didn't blink. I just looked him straight in the eye and added, I vote no confidence. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The chairwoman cleared her throat. Motion passed. And just like that, he was out. Removed as CEO. Relegated to a non-voting advisory role pending further review. The vote was swift, clean, legal. He tried to argue, tried to claim betrayal. Said things like, she's my wife. She's just doing this out of spite. I didn't respond, because I wasn't there to justify anything. After the meeting, he chased me into the hallway. His face was pale, his voice hoarse. Claire, please. Why are you doing this? I turned slowly. Looked at him, really looked. This was the man who told me I was nothing, who laughed when I mentioned wanting to return to work, who mocked my intelligence, ignored my value, erased my identity. Now he was begging. I leaned in close enough that no one else could hear. You told me I was just a housewife, I whispered. So I built an empire behind your back. His eyes filled with something I hadn't seen in years. Fear. I turned away, heels clicking against the tile, as I walked out, not just of that room, but out of his shadow. That night, he didn't come home. I poured myself a glass of wine and stood in the kitchen right where he once belittled me, where he once said I didn't understand the real world. And yet here I was, standing taller than I ever had. The next morning, the media started circling. Rumors of a hostile investor takeover. Speculation about the woman behind VNC Holdings. I didn't confirm anything, but I didn't hide either. Instead, I met with a lawyer, prenup clause in hand, tax records, schedules. Years of proof that I'd handled everything at home while he played the corporate visionary. And when the lawyer saw the documentation, he gave a slow, impressed nod. I think you have a case for spousal compensation, a strong one. And now, he wasn't just answering to the board. He was answering to me in court. I wish I could say the divorce was clean, that he accepted the truth, signed the papers, and faded into the background. But men like him don't go quietly. He fought. He cried, then cursed, then begged. Said I was destroying the family. Said the kids would be traumatized. Said I owed him a chance to explain. But I didn't need an explanation, because I'd lived it every silent dinner, every eye roll, every time he walked past me like I was furniture. I didn't need words to know how little he respected me. He'd made that clear enough. The court, however, needed words, documents, proof. So I gave them all of it. Every calendar entry showing I handled the pediatrician visits. Every grocery receipt. Every email where I canceled job offers to keep the house stable. Every tax return showing zero income but full-time labor. And most importantly, the prenup clause. My lawyer built a case so airtight, so brutally precise, the judge didn't even blink when ruling in my favor. Spousal compensation granted. Backdated. With interest. And where would those payments come from? His company? The same one that now listed me as its largest single stakeholder. I remember the moment he realized what that meant. We were seated across from each other in a small mediation room, just the two of us and our attorneys. His lawyer slid the numbers across the table. He stared at the figure in silence for a long time. Then with a bitter laugh muttered, "So, I'm paying you alimony from my own company." I leaned forward. "No, my company." He didn't say a word after that. The kids stayed with me, not because I fought for custody, but because they asked to. They saw what I saw. They felt the distance he'd built long before I ever walked away. He tried to win them over with promises, trips, gadgets, attention. But kids aren't stupid. They know who shows up. They know who stays. I didn't celebrate after the papers were signed. There was no party, no champagne. Just a quiet evening at home with my kids eating takeout and watching an old movie. But that night after they went to bed, I walked into my office. My office, not some corner of the living room, and opened my laptop. I pulled up the company dashboard. Profit margins were rising. 2 of the startups I'd invested in were preparing for Series B. Vanessa had scheduled a meeting with a European fund looking to partner. My hands hovered over the keyboard for a moment. Then I typed in a short message to the board effective. Immediately, I'm stepping down from operational duties. VNC Holdings will maintain passive investment status. My focus moving forward will be on building new ventures. I hit send. Because I didn't want to spend the rest of my life managing his mess. I had built enough to walk away on my terms. Later that week he called. I almost didn't pick up. But curiosity got the better of me. His voice was quiet, measured, different. I just wanted to say, "I didn't know you were capable of all that." I smiled. "That's the problem. You never bothered to find out." Then I hung up. That was the last time we ever spoke directly. Now every month I receive a direct deposit from the company. His name is still on the memo line, along with the words court-mandated compensation. And every time I see it, I don't feel anger, I don't feel triumph, I feel peace. Because I no longer need his validation. I am not just anything. I am not a housewife. I am not a shadow. I am not his support act. I am the architect of my own life. And I built something powerful out of nothing but silent spreadsheets and a will to rise. Sometimes I sit alone in my office late at night and think about the version of me that stood in the kitchen that morning. The woman holding a spoon and a baby being told she was just a housewife. I wish I could go back and whisper something in her ear. Not "you'll be okay." Not "you'll get through this." But you have no idea how powerful you already are. Because the truth is, I didn't change. I didn't become someone else. I didn't transform overnight into some unstoppable boss with flawless skin and perfect timing. What I did was remember. I remembered who I was before the silence, before the gaslighting, before the small daily humiliations that wore me down piece by piece. And once I remembered, I refused to forget again. To the women listening who've been called just anything, just a mom, just a wife, just emotional, just overreacting, I want you to know something. You are not small, you are not invisible, and you are not here to be convenient for someone else's story. They don't get to write your ending. You do. It took me years to understand that love doesn't mean shrinking yourself to fit someone's insecurities. It doesn't mean disappearing behind their dreams while yours quietly rot. It took me years to learn that sacrifice, when demanded and unreciprocated, becomes servitude. But now I live on my own terms. I dropped the last name. I bought a new house, modest, sunlit, with a garden the kids adore. I invest only in women-led ventures. And once a month, I mentor someone who's just getting started, someone like I used to be. Someone brilliant who just needed to be seen. As for him, he still runs in circles, chasing funding, blaming everyone but himself for the empire that slipped through his fingers. He doesn't know who he is without power. I know exactly who I am without him. And I don't need his apology. I don't need closure. I already have it. Every time I wake up in my own home with my own name and my own freedom, that's closure. So if you're watching this and you've ever been dismissed, diminished, or made to feel like you had nothing to offer, let me be the one to tell you. They were wrong. And the best part, one day if you choose to rise, they won't even see it coming. Because revenge isn't always fire and fury. Sometimes, it's a bank transfer.